Okay, guys, we have made it. If you did not go on this journey with me, then let me give you a recap. This book, this review, is Karin Slaughter's Beyond Reach, and is the 6th book in her Grant County series. I had discovered them backwards when I was like, what else does she have? I realized this was her beginning point, but what she has is this series with these characters, which eventually bleed into her Will Trent series, and then, you know, they merge and become their own thing. Oh my gosh. Sara Linton and Jeffrey Tolliver were married, they got divorced, and then they had begun this slow trek back to being back together. And so by this book, they have remarried. I must have missed. Maybe this isn't the 6th book. Maybe this is the 7th book, and I missed the 6th book, but I missed where they got married. Anywho, they are married. She is the coroner and pediatrician for their small town in Georgia. He is the sheriff. So that was kind of why they inevitably got back together, was because they are always working together. Not to mention, he was still in love with her, and on some level, she was still in love with him. Personally, by the end of this book, I realized that I prefer them as a non-married couple. I thought they had more sexual tension and chemistry when they were dancing around each other than when they were actually together. And maybe that was because in this book, Sara felt like a dead fish. She was super flat. I've always enjoyed her. I love how intelligent she is, not only in Grant County, but in the subsequent books where she is working with Will Trent. I've just always thought she was really dynamic. And in this one, she wasn't. But I'll get into that in a minute. The third character that I roll my eyes because I don't like this girl at all, but Slaughter just keeps enlarging her role, is Lena Adams, and she is Jeffrey's head detective. If you saw my last review of Faithless, then you know that she just keeps getting a bigger role in everything, but that she's also dating this really not great dude named Ethan, who she has sent to jail because it was the only way that she could think to escape him. This book is basically about Lena. If you know my feelings about her, then you know how I am not gonna like this book on principle, but also you'll know that I didn't really care for Faithless. I thought Faithless was kind of, I want to say boring, but it was kind of flat. If I was gonna rate them, I would say I probably liked Faithless the least, and then I would follow it by Beyond Reach, only because I cannot stand Lena. I actually liked the writing of this one, and I liked how you never knew what was gonna come next, but in terms of the lead character, I mean, not only was Sara a dead fish, but Lena, I just wanted her to get herself together. I wanted her to finally prove to me why she should be a leading lady. And she never did. Her whole life is about doing the wrong thing, making the wrong decisions, and never learning from it. And so as much as I wanted to root for her, as much as I wanted to be like, yeah, you're a great detective, like you can solve all of this on your own, you don't need Jeffrey's help, she really, like, I mean, the whole thing is she's involved in a crime, and then she goes on the lam. So we're wanting to know, how did she get involved in this incident? And where did she go? What is she doing? So I'm thinking she's actually doing something. Like, whatever's going on with her is important. And in the end, I felt like she didn't help to solve the problem at all. She helped to create the problem. Let's just get into it, alright? I had a lot of problems with this book. Beginning with, and this is probably just an audiobook issue, it opens with a prologue of someone being burned alive. And most definitely, if I had been reading it on paper, I would have realized it was not Lena being burned alive, it was somebody else. But I was just under this impression that Lena is the one being burned alive. So then, when I come to find out that she is alive, I was like, then what happened in that prologue? On one hand, the prologue does set things up because this is, ooh, that's cold. This is the incident that Lena is being accused of. But on the other hand, I could have done without it. And that's the same, for me, there's a lot of prologues that I could do without. So the book opens with that prologue, and then it segues into Sara being on trial for the death of a patient. If you saw my review of Blindsided, you'll know that I mentioned her patient named Jimmy Powell who has leukemia. And I told you I would get to it, and here we are. So the deal is that it was discovered late, and she opted not to tell them right away for various reasons. Then when the family started doing treatment, in the end, it just didn't work. So they decide to sue her for malpractice. It's like moths to a flame, apparently, with these kinds of things where a number of other patients are like, I want to jump on that bandwagon. This is the incident for Sara that turns her into a dead fish, where she kind of loses the will to be a person with a personality and a will or a drive to do anything of substance. We don't get the verdict of this until later in the novel, which, spoiler, they settle. It does mean that she apparently, like, I only got this from reading other people's reviews. Somehow it slipped by me, or maybe I just am not smart enough to have picked up on it. She has to close her practice in that town, which that, along with something that happens at the very end, is what then pushes her into merging with Will Trent. We have this Lena thing with someone being burned alive in a car, and then we have Sara. Jeffrey gets a call from the local sheriff of Lena's hometown, and he's like, she's been involved in something and she will not speak to us. I want you to come and help us out. He brings Sara along because he's like, I need to get you away from all this drama. They get to the hospital where Lena is, and she has a visceral reaction to seeing them. Like, she has been entirely mute since the police discovered her at the site of this burned car. As soon as she sees Jeffrey and Sara, she's like, get out of here. Sara manages to talk Jeffrey and the local sheriff, who's this young dude, like barely out of high school, named Jake Valentine. She manages to talk them into leaving the room so she can have some alone time with Lena. She convinces Lena to have a shower, and then, wouldn't you know it, Lena escapes through the drop roof, which sort of ties back into something from Sara's past, because Sara was raped, and she was raped because her rapist had been hiding in the ceiling and was able to access her because of this drop ceiling roof, because, you know, you can remove the panels. She's feeling guilty, but she's also, like, almost sedated. Like, literally, she has no personality. She is not a character to sit back. She is a character who is going to stick her nose where it doesn't belong. And so the fact that she's just kind of like, you know something's wrong. I was just really surprised that Slaughter did that. I can understand Sara's mental state, but at the same time, I was just so surprised that Slaughter just let her kind of sit back and do nothing, like, at all. Nothing spurred Sara into engaging with the outside world. Lena has escaped, and Valentine thinks that Jeffrey and Sara did it on purpose. They convince him otherwise, and then, despite the fact that Jeffrey doesn't really like Valentine, he doesn't trust him, he's like, what is this young kid doing? How did he get elected sheriff? They team up in order to solve the mystery. The book, like most, are narrated by those three characters, but it's separated into past and present. It starts where Lena learns that there's something wrong with her Uncle Hank, who, when she was young, Her father had died before she was born. Her mother died not long after she and her twin sister were born. They were raised by their meth-addicted uncle, Hank. At some point, he had become clean, but then she started to notice that he wasn't as responsive as he usually is, and then she gets a call from someone who they both know saying, look, like, something's wrong with Hank, you need to come. We start with her there. We proceed with her nosing around, trying to figure out what's wrong with her uncle, trying to figure out what's going on in this town. She had been doing some surveillance. She realized that her uncle had started doing meth again. Now she's trying to figure out, like, what's going on in this town. She starts surveilling this warehouse, I think it was, where all these meth deals were going down. And then she tries to blackmail the meth dealers. In the end, they had been following her around. They traced all of her steps. They pick her up. They drive her and the woman who had alerted her to her uncle's condition to the football field and set the car on fire with the other woman inside of it. That is where we meet with Jeffrey and Sara. With Jeffrey and Sara, we have to figure out, again, what's going on, because we don't know any of this stuff about what Lena is seeing. We see it as we go. That's how we really learn that apparently small towns are rife with drug lords. This then leads back to Lena's boyfriend, ex-boyfriend Ethan, who was not quite clear, but was a skinhead in his past. Apparently he had changed his ways, and now he's upset that he's in jail because it's the only way to survive is to kind of go back to those roots. But we're told this entire time he's ruthless. Like, he's the one in charge. I do like that. As much as I don't care for Ethan, as much as I don't care for him and Lena and their storyline, like, I do like how Slaughter makes me question. Lena goes to see him, and it really bothers me because she's like, oh, I'm all badass, I'm gonna just, stay strong. She basically crumbles. This is why I don't like you, Lena, is because you never solve the problem, you just propitiate the problem. When Jeffrey goes in, of course, then, like, a pissing contest, and Ethan's like, oh, well, you're gonna get yours eventually, big tough guy. And during this, so here we're gonna get into some big spoilers. Maybe the biggest spoiler of all is Jake Valentine, the sheriff, is actually involved in this drug trade. There had been an old sheriff who his house had been firebombed, which essentially ran him out of town, but he had been involved with it. So for however many years, the local law enforcement was actually part of the problem. They were involved in this drug trade because it makes big money. But he's run out of town. Jake takes his place. But nobody thinks he's a bad guy. There's nothing in his record. And we learn that actually what got him into it, or kind of what solidified his status in it, is that he married the kingpin's daughter. And so it was kind of like, what do we do with this son-in-law? Or not even, I think it wasn't even the daughter, I think it's her brothers, who, like, what are we going to do with this brother-in-law who's basically worthless? We're going to make him think he's important. But he then relates back to Ethan because he is also a Nazi sympathizer. He's a skinhead who you would never know is a skinhead. But as Jeffrey is at the jail talking to Ethan, Lena realizes, she recognizes the tattoo, so then he tries to kill her and Sara. Ultimately fails, but he dies in the process and they get out. Hank is on the brink of death, but he also survives. Final two spoilers are Lena's mother, who she, during this whole story, feels is like the linchpin, who, if she can just figure out the answers behind her mother's death, she will understand everything that's going on. So the thing is, Hank had always told Lena and her sister Sybil that their mother had died because of childbirth. But what had really happened was after the death of her husband, she got addicted to meth, and therefore she actually got Hank addicted to meth. And so if you saw Blindsided, you know that Sybil is blind, and it is because their mother hit her with her car. For some reason, Lena always thought Hank did it, so this was something she held against him for like decades. She then realizes, well, obviously my mother did not die when Hank told me she died, and she was not this perfect angelic creature he made her out to be. So she goes to him a final time and she says, look, just tell me the truth. He says, well, she actually died this way. But the truth is, she's still alive. And this is one of those things I do love, again, of how Slaughter just weaves things together, because we obviously know there's something not right with this mother character. We know there's something important about her. But what? In this town, they only have this one like really nasty hotel. We're constantly told how the maid doesn't know how to do her job. When you know it, the maid is Lena's mother. Jeffrey has figured this out, and he encourages her to tell Lena, but I don't know if she ever does. She just says, it wouldn't do anybody any good. She's better off thinking I'm dead. So there's a spoiler, but the ultimate spoiler, all right? Because of Sarah's rape, she's unable to have children. Another subplot within this story is that they had been wanting to adopt a child, but then obviously with all of her court proceedings, Sarah is worried that is going to have an effect on their ability to adopt. They solved the big mystery, they've come home, and she gets the call that they've been approved, that they have a child ready to be adopted. She tells Jeffrey, and she is hesitant because she's like, maybe I'm not suited to be a mother. Like, after all this desire and excitement and build up, maybe I really shouldn't do it. Especially after the trial with Jimmy Powell, and she's just like, maybe I really don't know how to handle kids. Jeffrey is like, hello, that's completely wrong. Like, this is perfect. Goes out to the mailbox, and he gets blown up by a mailbox bomb, which is something I had been expecting because I knew it was going to happen because, as I said, I started at the end after Sarah had met Will Trent, so I knew that her husband had died, so I was waiting for it. But, you know, one thing that bothers me, or has been bothering me throughout all of these books, is that I feel like Slaughter builds us up to something really great in terms of the culprit. And then it's just there. She just kind of sneaks in who the bad guy is, but there's no real fanfare. There's no big reveal. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, he was a suspect. Like, okay, I mean, no big surprise. Although Jake was kind of surprised because at first Jeffrey's like, this guy, he could be involved, but like, really? I don't see how he would be capable of being so sadistic and so evil. And then he ends up being the bad guy. It's like, all right, okay. Like, she did a really good job with that. But with this, even though I knew he was gonna die, I guess because I didn't know how many books were after this, or if any were after it, I just wasn't expecting it. Even and you still don't really know who did it. I've only gotten a couple chapters into the first Will Trent book, and I think Sarah is in it. So obviously things have happened. Jeffrey has died. So maybe eventually it will be explained who was actually behind it. I'm just assuming it's Ethan. I'm just thinking he made good on his threat, but I will find out. But yeah, so that's kind of where we leave this book, is Sarah thought she had the world in front of her, and now she realizes she doesn't. You know, I'm kind of done with the book, but I do want to talk about the characters. And that is, I was expecting a lot from Sarah and Jeffrey. As I said, I got nothing from Sarah for 99.9% of this novel. But with Jeffrey, I mean, I guess I grew to like him, but I'd expected a lot more. I mean, just because of what I knew from the Will Trent books, from what I'd read from other people's reviews about how they love this relationship. Maybe because I missed 2 books, I never really saw much development. But I didn't get a whole lot of chemistry between the two. And that bothered me, particularly because in Faithless, Sarah was kind of a non-entity. She just didn't play a very big role. And then in this one, she had no personality. So I just their interactions were boring, not uncomfortable, but just boring to me. As of right now, I am Team Will. A lot of people love the fact that Sarah and Jeffrey had a lot of problems. But one thing that does confuse me, and maybe I just have to read the 2nd and 3rd books. In another book, I think Will or somebody brought up Jeffrey and maybe some kind of insecurity as to, am I good enough? Am I as good as him? And Sarah just is saying, like, look, it wasn't a good relationship. It wasn't a healthy relationship. It's nothing you need to be worried about or compare yourself to. And that's not the impression I'm getting from any of these books or from any reviews. I mean, yes, they had their problems. We all have problems in relationships. I got the impression that it was more of abusive, physically or mentally, emotionally. Even though they broke up the first time because she caught him cheating, she got back together with him because he proved to her that he had grown as a person, grown as a man, that wasn't what he was going to do anymore. Like, and so I was let down by that, but only because I knew it was going to happen in the future and I had expectations. So maybe I would recommend to you not to read the subsequent books, but to get to these first. Or maybe it's just my over-analytical brain. I'll go on and talk about 2 more things, and then we're all going to go along on our merry way. One thing that I loved about this book, and that I think Slaughter does so well in all of her books, is how gritty it is. Not for the faint of heart. These books are not for people who don't like the idea of gruesome things, of blood and guts, and I mean, like, so I told you that Jake died. He had taken Lena and Sarah to Lena's uncle's house for one reason or another, and while there, this is when Lena realizes his involvement in everything. He then plots to kill them, but make their death look like it was a meth lab gone wrong, that he was just going to blow up the house and make it look like, someone in there just didn't do it right. Then Lena, I think it's Lena or Sarah, one of them convinces, because he calls in some henchmen, and she's like, look, he's already in the process of framing you. The henchman handcuffs Lena and Jake to a table or something, to something that they can't get away from, and gets out of Dodge. Jake has been incapacitated by this time, and what Lena does is she saws off his hand. There's a lot of this, guys, like just a lot of really gritty grit, and I love it because, in my opinion, that is what Slaughter does best. That is how she differentiates herself. And granted, I haven't read a whole lot of crime fiction. I don't read Dan Brown or anything like that. The closest I get is Lisa Jewell and Lisa Gardner. But I just love how she doesn't shy away from things. As much as I'm like, I need to hold my lunch in, I'm also loving it because it feels so realistic. I know that all of her research is not going to come across perfectly. Everything that she portrays medically or even just within police procedure is not going to be perfect. But that's because it's fiction, people. Like, you got to make things work for your story. But I think she gets close enough, at least for me. She satisfies my need for something that feels real, okay? On the flip side of that, I thought, aside from the fact that I could care less about Lena. I don't really want her to be the center of attention. This one went on a little too long. It's not surprising because Slaughter, particularly in the Grant County series, she loves detail. She loves having tons of characters and tons of events and tons of zigzags and tons of red herrings. She just puts a lot in there. So I should have expected it. But I was just, there just was a point where I was like, can we please stop zigging and just go in a straight line? I just want to know who's really at fault. I just want to know where Lena is. I just want to know how everything ties together. Can we please not have 8 million pretend culprits and get to the final bad guy? But that's just me. Her writing is as such that I still went through to the end. I didn't skip, which we all know I will skip. I hope this was another satisfactory review. I am tired, but I think I was coherent. I hope I was coherent. If I wasn't coherent, be kind, okay? Have a great day, and I will see you next time. Adieu to you and you and you.